everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fiscal Fridays. Today we have a very special guest. We have Dennis Porter from the Satoshi Action Fund joining us today to talk about Bitcoin and what it can mean for Idahoans going into 2024. He is the president of the Satoshi Action Fund and founder of the organization. Thank you, Dennis, for joining us today.
Loss, great to be here. Thanks for glad to be in a fellow Pacific Northwest state. So glad to be here in Boise and looking forward to working to educate lawmakers on the value of Bitcoin with you.
Thank you. And so tell us a little bit more about your organization and what you guys do.
Yeah, so Satoshi Action Fund was founded in June of 2022, and it was founded with the distinct purpose of going to the states to advocate for the benefits of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And so we've done that very, very successfully. We feel like in our first cycle, we were able to pass 2 bills into law in Montana and in Arkansas. And that bill ultimately protected Bitcoin mining from various forms of discrimination. We want to make sure Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining as a technology is able to flourish across the entire country. And we find that the states are the best place to go and score wins for this technology.
Absolutely. And so my understanding is that you've actually really grown the number of states that you're working in this year, actually. Is it 17, am I right?
Yeah, that's right. We're at 17 now. That number actually could increase, which is sort of insane as a small team, but we are very passionate about what we do. And just like you are about your work here in Idaho, when you're passionate about what you do, it doesn't seem like work. We're having fun all the time and really enjoying what we're doing. So 17 states, we have active legislation, not just working in states, we have active legislation in 10 states that we've announced so far. So hopefully we'll get to all 17 by the end of the session.
That is quite impressive, especially for a team of, you only have 3 on your policy team, actually.
2 on the policy team, technically. Myself and Eric Peterson is our policy director. And then, of course, we also have sort of we bring on consultants and lobbyists, different states that we go to help support the work that we're doing. But it's really me and Eric that are focused on the policy. We have Carolyn who helps me with my schedule, helps me to make sure that I'm staying on point, and great strategist as well. And of course, our 2 co-founders that help me to be able to make sure that whenever we need to, we can pull them in to help with various items. But yeah, really I would say 3 full-time, and then we have, of course, Dr. Marie Rudd, who does our research as well. So very excited about that, yeah.
I gotcha. So you're just racking up those airline miles.
Yeah, that's right. Trying to get my status. Yeah, on Alaska. That's my favorite airline so far.
There we go. And so for those members of the audience who aren't very familiar with Bitcoin and aren't very familiar with the benefits of Bitcoin, could you just really succinctly kind of explain what it is and why it should matter to somebody who's not yet in that space?
Yeah, definitely. So, I like to separate the 2 things. You have Bitcoin, the asset, and then you have Bitcoin mining. Just starting with Bitcoin, the asset. Bitcoin, the asset, has the ability to provide financial services to anyone across the country and across the globe. And it does this through a permissionless nature. So you don't need to ask permission. You don't need to have an ID. You don't need to have anything. You can just sign up. And this is really important for people who have been traditionally left out of the system. It's also important for groups that might be coming under some sort of political scrutiny or political discrimination. We've seen more and more that money has been used as a form of almost like a weapon, like a political weapon. And so Bitcoin allows people that are being left out, that are disenfranchised, to be able to have access to that technology. And it also is an incredibly powerful savings technology. Because Bitcoin can't be debased, it's a finite supply, you're able to save in that currency without any fear that anyone will ever come along and debase it or print it into infinity, like we are seeing with some paper currencies, fiat currencies around the world. So that's one side. That's Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin is also supported, in order to have all those unique features, in order to be debasement-free currency, right? You have to have a network of data centers that support that currency. And those data centers are called Bitcoin miners. But those Bitcoin miners also have very, very unique abilities and features that I think most states are going to want to look into and try to attract to their jurisdiction. Namely, that Bitcoin mining is very, very good at balancing the grid. Unlike traditional data centers, Bitcoin mining is doing the same thing globally at the same time. Whereas if you go to Amazon, you might want to check cat video. You might be trying to order Uber or Amazon. You might get some groceries delivered. These are all different things that are occurring across those data centers that Amazon and Google create. But with Bitcoin, it's just one thing: secure the network, process transactions, mint new Bitcoin. And they're all doing it simultaneously. So if you shut down, let's say, all of the Bitcoin mining here in Idaho, the network Bitcoin will still continue to operate and function without any sort of interruption at all. This allows for Bitcoin mining to participate in the grid in very unique ways. As an example, down in Texas, during Winter Storm Elliott, 1,500 megawatts of Bitcoin mining load shut down during that winter storm. And that was right when everybody else was cranking up their heat, trying to stay warm. Demand was skyrocketing. The miners wound down, delivered that power back to the grid. And for those that don't know, maybe no context on what 1,500 megawatts of power is, that's enough power to heat 1.5 million small homes or to energize 300 large hospitals. So it's an incredible amount of power. So you have freedom money, inclusive money that is powered by grid balancing technology, really incredible stuff. And we want to make sure that more states are able to adopt this technology freely.
And actually, so building on that point where you're talking about the distributed nature of Bitcoin and how that really improves its robustness and makes sure that it's able to handle whether it be governments or a natural disaster that wipes out,
That's right.
that harms a particular area. One question that I get really often is, couldn't the government in control of the internet or over a particular geographic location, couldn't that harm the Bitcoin network, or couldn't that let the government control those assets? And one example that I usually bring up is how China's completely banned Bitcoin, but they still have a decent proportion of the hash rate with verifying all those transactions and making sure that they're mining Bitcoin and using Bitcoin in China still, even with the ban. And so what is your response to that with the government coming in and potentially threatening that network?
Yeah, I mean, from a network perspective, I don't think Bitcoin itself is at risk. What I am most concerned with regards to governments banning the technology or limiting our access to the technology is it limits our freedoms and it limits our ability to engage with a technology that has a lot to offer. And that's why Satoshi Action is so aggressive in trying to ensure that states protect access to this technology. We are already seeing at the federal level, people like Elizabeth Warren want to take away your right to be able to access technology. She is actively trying to push a bill that would backdoor ban your ability to hold Bitcoin, so what we call self-custody, and then also your ability to mine Bitcoin. And so what we're doing is we're going state by state to make sure that there's a bulwark of states that understand the value of the technology and want to make sure that their residents are able to access that technology. That's a bulwark that we want to create that'll initially be just to protect users, but eventually we want to have so many states that are so pro-Bitcoin that we use that as a wedge and we influence federal policy through that wedge. So I'm not concerned that that Bitcoin will go away if a government bans it. I'm mostly just concerned that we as individuals won't be able to access the technology freely and be able to operate it freely in the jurisdictions that we live in.
Right, and being able to build on that technology and allowing the market to adopt it and to work with it is going to be really, really important, especially as we have other threats like the Central Bank Digital Currency coming in and things like that, where the technology is already heading in this direction, but we want to make sure that the free market is able to have that private option of a private currency. So how does Bitcoin compare to the current financial system where you have all your money in a bank and that you have those transactions in banks versus a Bitcoin transaction where it's on the blockchain?
Yeah, one of the biggest differences is that you can custody or hold your digital asset or your Bitcoin in a wallet that you solely control and that no one can ever gain access to it. And that's very different from the traditional financial system where you have dollars and you want to be able to spend them digitally. You have to give your dollars to a bank. You have to give your dollars to a central authority, and then they allow you to spend those dollars digitally. Well, that's no longer necessary with Bitcoin. You as an individual are able to spend, save, and transact in Bitcoin without any need for a central authority. Now, if you want to still use a bank, you still trust banks, you like banks, there certainly are banks that custody digital assets, and there are definitely moves to be able to expand on those efforts to allow more banks. In fact, we just saw a letter from the bankers associations, the various bankers associations out there asking the SEC to allow banks to custody Bitcoin and digital assets. That's more broadly. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I think what Bitcoin does is it gives you more optionality as we head to a digital world where cash is going away. And as cash goes away, all of a sudden you're not allowed, you don't have the ability to, save at home. You don't have the ability to actually custody your own value, your own money. And so we want to make sure that individuals have the ability to have access to a currency that they can hold themselves in a digital world where paper cash is going away, so that they have a lot of autonomy and independence from centralized systems.
Gotcha. And the government is trying to do this as well. They're trying to do the central bank digital currency where instead of your money being transferred between banks, then it would just be transferred on the government's ledger, and they would monitor all those transactions. And it also makes it a programmable currency where they could automatically deduct taxes or automatically pay out welfare benefits and things like that. And so
automatically restrict people that they don't agree with in the time being is probably also a really important one. That's the thing I fear the most. Like with CBDCs, there's an expansion of control and power. And that, anytime you have a tool like that, certainly they could use it for good, but I fear that it will be mostly used as a weapon against groups that don't agree with what's happening at the federal government level, that don't agree with what's happening with central banks. And so as an example, they could give us money that can expire. They can give us money that can only be spent on certain things. They can give us money that we can and can't access at different times depending on who we voted for. Or as an example, on both sides of the aisle, this matters. If you're a gun store owner, right? All of a sudden, we don't allow gun store purchases. Or if there's an abortion clinic, we don't allow that anymore. And, people will be on both sides of those issues and might like that it's being used on the group that they don't agree with. But when you give government that power, you give government the power to say, you can't access money because I don't like your political opinions, that can quickly be turned around and used against you. And so that is what I really truly fear with CBDCs, that it would be ultimately used as a form of censorship to control how people view and think about politics and how they express themselves.
Right. And this isn't that far afield either, because we already see this with the current banking system.
That's right.
We're not loaning to gun stores because of their business with selling firearms and things like that. So it's not that unreasonable to assume that this is the direction that we would be heading for central bank digital currency.
It's not far-fetched, and it's already happening with central bank digital currencies in countries like China. China has already launched a pilot project for a central bank digital currency. I don't think we need to wonder or question why they would want to do that. China is very interested in controlling the populace through these types of technologies politically. And so I oftentimes hear from lawmakers, they say, we got to follow China's lead on this one. I'm like, this is one of those things where I don't think we should be following China's lead. I think, in fact, we should be following either Bitcoin or various other types of digital assets where it's more of a free market and you have optionality and you can control your money and control your destiny.
And so how is your organization working in states to ensure that people's access to free, sound money is guaranteed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a model policy we call the Blockchain Basics Act. You could also probably call it the Digital Bill of Rights. This is my favorite slogan for it, because it protects your core access to the technology. Your fundamental Bitcoin rights is what I call them. Your ability to self-custody, to hold, to transact in Bitcoin, your ability to mine Bitcoin, your ability to run a node, which for those of you that might be new to this technology, a node is a critical part of Bitcoin infrastructure outside of mining. It allows you to control what transactions, when you put them out onto the ledger, you're able to see and verify those transactions and verify everybody else's transactions. Gives you a little bit more autonomy. I would say it's like a power user of Bitcoin, so to speak. So we want to make sure that people are allowed to have access to that technology and access to Bitcoin and all digital assets. We're not picking winners and losers, although I'm a big Bitcoin guy. I want to make sure that the free market is open and available for everyone to choose. I think in the long term, most people will end up choosing Bitcoin, but we'll let the free market decide on that one.
Right, and the way you guys written this legislation is actually it's very technology neutral. Am I right?
That's correct. Yeah, tech neutrality is extremely important to us as an organization. We have found that it is a very effective way to be able to present an idea and then also not create constraints on where technology might go. You know, back in the early days in the tech world, they started creating policy around technology. And they said, oh, well, this is the technology we have in front of us. Let's pass a law to be able to help advance that technology and create regulatory frameworks for it so it can move quicker and advance in America. Well, ultimately, they realized that they crafted this policy and the tech had sort of shifted, but the policy they created didn't encompass that new technology that was created, 5-10 years later. So they had to rewrite all the laws. So what they found was better was to just create a lot of neutrality so that technology can flow where it needs to flow. And then those new technologies that come about are still protected under the law. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with our legislation.
And that's one thing I want to really emphasize too is you can write laws to be tech neutral, to regulate things no matter what they are. But in your case, you've written laws to protect things and to be tech neutral no matter what it is. And so then as the market changes in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then this law will still protect people's rights to custody those digital assets.
That's correct. We want to this bill doesn't ask for anything. We're no special privileges. We simply just want to make sure that Americans are able to access a technology that we believe will add benefits to them as individuals. It'll add benefits to the economy. It'll add benefits to the grid. And it will actually also add benefits to the environment as well, because Bitcoin mining as a technology is a very powerful climate technology in the sense that it can mitigate natural gas methane emissions. So it's another part we haven't jumped into yet a whole lot. And people are wondering, how did we get from talking about freedom money to talking about methane emissions? But it's an important subject because there's a lot of methane emissions that are being emitted all over this country, all across the world, that go unmitigated. It's a stranded energy source that if we were to go in there and allow the Bitcoin miners to mitigate it and use it for their Bitcoin mining operations, you could do something that's good for the environment, you could do something that's good for the economy, and ultimately you can do something that's good for the country because we're able to make sure that this technology is happening here in America and that ultimately any of the innovations that spur off of this technology happen here in the United States.
And Idaho is a very rural state, of course, and so how does this technology help rural Idahoans, as well as the people who would live in the big cities where you normally picture technology, the forefront of technology being?
That's a really, really important conversation because traditionally in tech, you see people moving to the coastal cities and you see them moving to where there is a lot of talent and they want to be able to access that talent. Well, with Bitcoin, particularly with Bitcoin mining, that data center infrastructure thrives off rural parts of the country that have been left behind for the last 10, 20, 30 years as we've offshored manufacturing. There's a ton of electrical infrastructure that has been left behind from that offshoring, and there's a lot of cheap and available energy in those parts of the country. So a Bitcoin miner can go and locate right where the energy is, typically in rural parts of the country, be able to start their operations and also hire people from the local community. These Bitcoin mining operations are good paying jobs, but they don't need to hire people from California. They don't need to hire people from New York. They can hire locally and train people up very rapidly to be able to operate this equipment. So these are high paying tech jobs in rural communities. It's not something you typically hear about, but it's something that Bitcoin mining does offer to Idaho and the rest of the country.
That's great to hear, especially for Idahoans who may be looking at the shifts that are happening in our state, and you don't need to move to Boise to be a Bitcoin miner. And actually, that's one thing I wanted to ask you too. So, do you have to be a big company to mine Bitcoin, or can you do that on your own as an individual?
You can do it on your own. I wouldn't say it's like by any means a cheap business to get into. So, but yes, someone could buy just one machine. They're about $2,000 to $3,000 to get started, or someone could invest, millions of dollars into these operations. But that's the great thing about Bitcoin is that it provides the ability for anyone to access and participate at any level. You can buy fractions of a Bitcoin, you can buy one Bitcoin mining machine, or you can buy, a whole Bitcoin, or you can buy a whole entire data center worth of Bitcoin mining machines. It's really up to the individual on what they want to choose and how they want to participate.
And so if somebody's new to this, how do they get involved? How do they start a Bitcoin wallet and go about? What resources have you found helpful with your organization for advocating for Bitcoin and teaching people how to use the technology?
Yeah, I mean, there's really two ways to participate for the most part. The number one way is you can buy Bitcoin. You can buy Bitcoin and then you can take it and you can put it in your own personal digital wallet. I highly encourage that. There's tons of resources out there if people want to look up, but as a note, there's a lot of, scams out there. So you got to be careful. And I would just highly encourage people to do their own research when it comes to what type of wallet they use. For the most part, I have found that Trezor, Ledger, these types of wallets, these are name brands for people that aren't familiar, are fairly well trusted. There's also a company called Cold Card that does a great job as well. So I stick to those three, and I'm sure there's other good ones out there, but I don't want to recommend ones that I haven't tried out myself. So that's one way to engage with the technology. In my opinion, the second way, which is really important, is to start some type of a Bitcoin business. So this can be everything from wallets to mining. This can be everything from providing hiring services for the community. So there's a ton of different ways that we need more talent in the Bitcoin space. And so if you see something that's lacking, I would just say, go ahead and start building, because we are very, very early still and have a lot of room to grow.
That's great. And we'll also include some links to your webpage in the video description to help people find your website, and also some links in the video description to kind of help people, some good resources for people to get started with the technology. Thank you for joining us today and sharing what you guys are doing across the country. It's really exciting to see this technology taking off, and to see a good group of people to protect it going forward and make sure that people have rights to sound money.
Thank you. Well, and thank you, Lost, for having me on, and the Idaho Freedom Foundation. You're doing incredible work here, and very excited how cutting edge you are with Bitcoin compared to a lot of these other state groups. So we're hoping that you can help us lead the way on this stuff.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah.